I think I slouch too much. I think I slouch way too much. And honestly, I wish more people would tap me on the back and say, hey, you're fucking up a little bit too much. Do you see people around you utilizing similar heuristic all the time? Situations where you're essentially trying your best to alleviate communicative friction, right? That's sort of one of the biggest things we're dealing with if we're talking about the misinformation, disinformation complex that we've afforded ourselves today. It's sort of this issue where being in a space of deliberation, of being in a space of something that's difficult to talk about, we very often find ourselves slouching. We find ourselves not ready for a given conversation at the right time, or not ready to put on our best face at the right moment, right? Do we have any way to help people from getting lost in those moments of high friction? Some way to make us less avoidant of difficult conversation? When we have this situation where seemingly some people are equipped with tools to navigate very difficult conversations, tools in which I argue do not require some imaginatory genius, but more so a knowledge about recognizing a certain point, recognizing a certain friction, or recognizing some sort of need to take a step back, take a satellite view, take a 30,000-foot view of the situation, no matter what it is, whether you're talking about deliberating songs, dogs, or what to eat, or if you're deliberating mass geopolitical consequence, or what to do about a piece of leadership that's failing to hold up to our standards, right? How do you get people to not slouch so often? And allow me to go into that a little bit. I slouch so often now, and I hate the fact that I do, but in my daily life, I am constantly finding a way to get comfortable for the space that I am, whether I'm, working at my desk or reading a book or something, or simply just eating food. I'm finding myself sort of collapsing into a state which is the easiest or most comfortable in the moment. But have we ever agreed that that's how your body is supposed to be supported? Too often find ourselves being silenced out of the labor required to bring people out of that sort of encumbered slouch. My guess is if we increase the awareness of how often and how easy people fall into slouching, similar to when you have an injured limb or you have a feeling a pain in a joint, how you sort of compensate in a variety of ways and then consequences show up in different places. Like say you have an issue with your foot, it propagates to your hip and to your back. In the same way, in our conversations, we see massive consequence to the way that we misform and misstructure our conversations. It's so easy to now build sort of pseudo credibility using our tools, using our sort of inspections, using all of these factors, and we don't have any way or any sort of armor against that sort of onslaught. And we've saw in our last video, there's plenty of people just trying to keep up as the size and scope of our problems ever grow. Do you usually find success in remembering your past conversations? I can't help but feel there are so many times where I'm allowing myself not to learn, but just sort of subside. Exactly how are you able to introduce this in a way that is not just creepy, weird? We're identifying a variety of ways in which our communicative greed, our methods of solving problems, our dialogue at the scale of nations is causing us to get confused too often, to get too annoyed, to self-censor to the point of we don't engage in some of the most important topics of the time. That degree of starvation has a consequence in which I think we've seen iterated over and over throughout history. In my opinion, a factor of our posture, a factor of how well we want to support and maintain long-term consistency, to try our best to support ourselves through our own effort, right? And how often do we feel so left behind? I understand we're keeping up and people who can afford to be informed, can afford to live a life that keeps them satiated, so to speak. How often are we allowing for these How often are we allowing for those sort of silent points of failure to sort of accumulate into real pain, failing to raise to the occasion out of these accumulated pains, out of both a just structural failure, but also a lack of support in that context. And the fact you're surrounded by people utilizing and weaponizing rhetoric in order to defame, dismantle, disengage, attempting to not have it all fall apart, if I'm being completely honest. If we want to be led, we need to make sure that we are holding our systems accountable, managing our managers, so to speak. But in this case, it's so much harder and not a point-to-point connection. It's a many-to-many, it's a nebulous, horrible mess, for lack of a better term. And I argue we are at a time to start enabling each other with that. I believe we're at a time where we can start to really think deeply about how hard we're working to support our own structures. Unity being the factor which can fight the forces working to dismantle and sort of divide and conquer. This is a problem, a structural problem, in which the consequences have been measured, but we're also seeing them in real time, very much so damage our ability to hold integrity in difficult conversations, in places where people start to feel desperate. We are not being supported when we're also being essentially barraged by rhetorical weaponry. And so what I wonder is, what causes you to give up on that? In our last video, we had plenty of people say, I am keeping up with this. I am not having a good time managing the information overload. What are the steps that we're making to counter that, to really give people agency? Well, this is something I'm pretty interested in, how we can actually help communicate to the user some sort of information that helps protect them from the keeping up with it, the nebulousness, the random onslaught of information that we're sort of endlessly subjected to. I think in order to combat a lot of the runaway that we've experienced with information is to build efficacy of the consumer, build confidence in what they're actually trying to digest, build an ability to interface with the world more so than they may already do. Finding ways to make sure that their voices are heard, as well as they're finding the best way to communicate what they're meaning in the moment. Now, I think I have sort of talked about the idea of tapping on the shoulder, and I think that connects slightly to this idea of using haptic feedback for little codes and insights for when you're in a conversation and when you're capturing something online, watching a video. Can you have this sort of buzz when it's noticing a certain pattern of speech, when it's noticing some sort of erroneous use of language, or trying to basically tap you on the shoulder when the sales pitch is coming your way, right? Now, I've also thought about ways to have this help more in a higher bandwidth scenario. How could you try to use something like glasses, like these fancy new glasses that are coming out that make you look like a complete dork, but can basically give you information immediately that you can either read or process in some way that's valuable when you're in a tense moment or in a position of high conflict, right? Are there any ways that we can see the tools I'm building now integrate into any of these weird gadgets that actually build something practical? Taking a look at this, I'm also interested in how our virtual spaces are going to start to have much more information go along with them. How can we have the fact that everybody's operating in a virtual world enable higher information for our conversations, right? How can it enable people to see more than meets the eye, essentially be exposed to more of what someone's actually saying rather than just the words or the voice that you're hearing through the screen? Now let's get back to reality and see what sort of insights our conversations produce.
I think definitely pause and take a breath before responding.
Yes.
But I think even beyond that, taking a step back and trying to get yourself in a place where you're genuinely curious about what the other person has to say, which is hard to do. Instead of just waiting to interrupt so you can tell them your point of view or tell them why they're wrong, or
Yes.
is just pause and just try to get it's something you have to do for yourself. Like, how can I get myself in a position where I am really genuinely curious? Because it'll make you a better listener.
Yes.
And people can tell when you're not
Actually there.
yeah, that you're just like waiting for your turn to talk. And that can be true when you're having a nice conversation with someone,
Yes.
right? Two friends.
Before I do something stressful, like take a stressful meeting or take a stressful conversation, I personally take 5 deep breaths.
Yes.
And I think that automatically may help with posture too. But whatever way you breathe to make yourself calm down
Yes.
is the tactic that I use before I start. And then the way I approach the conversation depends on who I'm speaking to.
When you have those moments to pause, you're also allowing yourself to think, but also, like, as you're saying, emotion is a huge part of communication. And so you're allowing to just say, like, what is my goal here? And I'm not just doing the first obligated to respond factor. So
Yeah.
trying to give yourself some preparation time.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah. So once you breathe, it out, hopefully you're feeling calmer
Yes.
and less emotional, so
Yes.
that you can approach whatever difficult conversation it is with less of those stronger emotions like anger, frustration.
There's some tricks and gimmicks, that I use, like things like power posing
Sure.
and things like if you're not on camera or before you go into a tough conversation. I heard a TED Talk once that's since been debunked that power posing can help, right?
Yeah.
Superman pose or whatever,
Yeah,
right?
confidence boosters. And
Yeah,
whatnot.
yeah. And also like visualization, closing your eyes, imagining what's going on.
Sure.
And then going into it, right? So it's a little bit of rehearsal and a little bit of refreshment before you go into it. Those are the gimmicks.
Sure.
But for me, the most powerful tool for staying alert is really remembering the core principle of active listening.
Yes.
So in my job, I'm an attorney, I'm not the expert on what's going on unless it's like a pure legal question, and it never is, right? And I just go in there and pretend I'm an idiot, and I ask all the questions.
Obsessive curiosity.
Yes,
In a way.
that's right.
In that way, do you also present sort of you show your trust as being like, I'm open to learning in this moment, as well as not being forced to wedge in what I think I know, but you're trying to create a open space for communication?
You're putting some words in my mouth here, but they're absolutely correct.
Okay,
right?
that's-
So I think it's most effective where, like I said earlier, you imagine you're an idiot and you ask the question. Of course, you ask the questions as cleverly as you can. You try and figure out what they're trying to say to you, and you parrot it back to them, right?
Yes.
Just to make sure that you're getting what they're saying. And so, yeah, having an open mind, right? Obsessive curiosity, like you said. If you take that approach, you won't be bored because you're learning what they're thinking,
Yes.
right? And they're telling you what's exactly on their mind. They may not express it the most clearly every time. And in fact, I find often people are very bad at telling me what they actually want to say. You ask questions, you repeat back to them, you ask some more questions, and then you write it down
You log
and
it.
you show it to them, and they're like, oh yeah, that's what I had in mind. And sometimes they tell me, I didn't even know I was thinking about that, right? And you pulled it out of me.
So I would say presence and paying attention to where the person you're having the conversation is at and how available they are for the type of communication that I'm looking for, and kind of having an awareness of whether or not you feel like it's actually going somewhere, whether they're being heard, whether they feel like they're being heard, whether you feel like you're being heard, and having kind of a gauge energetically for whether or not you should continue or take a pause.
Would this be an ability to use this technique or use this intuition in mid-conversation? Are you evaluating in real time? Do you have to know something about the person?
Yeah, I think it depends on who the conversation is with and what your history is with them, and then also how you're experiencing it. So if you're, maybe super triggered by somebody versus, being able to be an observer of the interaction and be able to look at it from the outside, I feel like then that kind of gives you a gauge. I don't think there's like one blanket answer, but I think that having an understanding or how it's sort of also feeling in your body, and being able to go from like a responsive place instead of super reactive, I feel like that always ends up getting you to a better place.
Yeah. So there's two things that come to mind. One is obviously reflection. I think that's a very big, important piece. A lot of times people will tend to want to blurt out their ideas, what's going on in their head, and instead of just really taking the time to understand what the other person is saying. And I've found that reflecting back what the other person's saying to the degree that they are actually they feel like you're aligned is a tool that I've used a lot to make sure that we're on the same page. Something I've also learned is sometimes it's not the words that people say, but there's a lot of reason and rationale behind what they're saying, and it's worth digging into. People will say words, and sometimes the words out of their mouth aren't necessarily what they intended it to be. It might not be as accurate as what they're thinking, and I think it's always worth trying to take the perspective of why is this person saying what they're saying, you know, and ask yourself different layers of why.
Yes.
I think that is a very, very big tool that I've learned in the past of just trying to get a little bit deeper into why the person is doing what they're doing and saying what they're doing, and then getting in the habit of like reflecting, because then once you get out of this, you kind of understand, you're reflecting, and they start to feel like they're on the same page. You will start to get a response from the other person where they start listening potentially, and you start create that back and forth.